Okay, we're going to go ahead and look at some of the panel sets in Adobe After Effects CS3. First thing you'll notice, there's lots of different panels, and one of the nice and cool things in Adobe After Effects CS3 is we have the ability to customize these panels according to the resolution on our monitors. So what we can do is we can select this your composition window and just click, and you'll see it's highlighted using the yellow ring around there. If we select, and we can actually drag this, and that basically can resize if we want to view our composition window slightly larger, and that resizes the other panel sets in that dock, so that will, the project window then resizes to match. We can do it again for the timeline at the bottom here, so if we want to have an expandable view of that, we can do so using just simply by dragging that, and we can again do the same for this panel set as well. And you can see it snaps back to its docking position, which is nice. So it's basically aligning back to the docking position. The next thing I want to highlight is something called flyout options. Now you'll see me use this a lot in the series of training videos. The flyout options are those options that are hiding under the flyout panel here, like so. And we've got different flyout options for various options, like so. We've got the flyout options for project window, composition window, like so, and then we've got stuff for the info and the character. Kind of for most of the panel sets, we've got each kind of a dockable a flyout panel that's dockable inside that panel set. And another cool feature is that if we select I'm just going to click on timeline controls. If I hold and click down, I can actually move that, and then whilst I'm doing that, I'm holding the mouse down, whilst I'm actually doing that, I can actually select and drag and drop that, and After Effects is kind of showing me where that I can position that, so I can actually position that over there, for example. Another really cool feature in After Effects graphical user interface is this little thing here. Basically, this is a small slider. When we make our panel sets really small, you'll see that this little slider appears, and we can actually slide, and it will tell us if there's any other panel sets hiding inside this dock. So I'll show you what I mean. If I click and drag that back here, and you can see I've got effects, and I've also got character, which is hiding under there, and I can't really get back to my effects. I think if I can click there just about, but I can use a slider. This sliding interface really works well, and I can go through back there as well. Now one of the things is that in case you've deleted this, so if I delete timeline controls, for example, we can get those back really quickly. We just need to go to window, and we can go to time controls, and there we go, it's appeared. Another cool feature is the ability to manipulate various workspaces. So at the moment here I've got a standard workspace, so this is Adobe's interpretation of a standard workspace for this application. We can go to window, and you can see if I go to workspaces, it's there on standard as well. However, a quicker way of doing that using less clicks is the standard, selecting the option from the workspace here. So what we can do is click on this option. We've got paint, we've got all panels, which basically gives you all the panels available inside AE, and we can say animation as well for those elements when working with animation are concerned. I'll kind of switch over to animation, it's quite cool, and then we can go to effects, and you get the idea. You can go through all of those. We can go to text when dealing with type, or we can use a standard like so. That's one of the few common features inside AE, looking at the graphical user interface, and you'll hear me refer to After Effects as AE, just short for After Effects CS3. And there we have it, panel sets. We have a look in a few of these panels, and in particular what they can do in the up and coming tutorials. I hope you enjoy. Another really nice feature in the graphical user interface of AE is the ability to customize each individual panel sets inside a workspace environment. So let's have a look at this in closer detail. In my previous video, you've seen me go through the workspace like so. One thing that I didn't mention is the ability to actually select. I'm just going to go back into standard, and the ability to basically control everything from one move. So let me highlight. So if I basically hover over here, and you'll see my mouse cursors changing into a crosshair. If I click and drag that, you can see everything just basically resizes according to itself. So that's really useful, very useful for those with larger screens. So that's quite handy. Another cool feature in the graphical user interface is, I'm just going to go through and select animation tab, and you'll notice a couple of those panel sets have now changed based around animation. And what I'm now going to do is I'm just going to make some drastic changes to this. So I'm just going to select this and make that bigger, so my composition window is huge. And I'm going to switch now to the standard view, and I'm going to go back to my animation view, and you'll notice After Effects saves those changes that you've made within that workspace. So that's actually brilliant. It's really useful, because you may have a preference of working inside a specific workspace and you would like it to remain that way. However, if you don't and you kind of mess that up, what you can do is go to here and just select reset animation and disregard changes, and it gives you back to that basically your default compositions work area space. So what I've just basically disregarded those changes. That's a brilliant way. And of course we can actually then create our own new workspace, as you can do in most of the Adobe applications. So we'll have a look at how we do this. So I'm just going to select new workspace, and I'll just call it Sav's workspace, and I'll select OK, and there you have it. And I'm just going to go back, I'm just going to make a few changes just so that we know about this workspace. Okay, so here we go. And what I'm going to do is go back to my standard view, and then I'm going to go back to my Sav's workplace, and you'll see it's still retaining those changes. And what I now want to do, I actually want to get rid of that, so I'm going to try deleting this, and I'm going to go here and select delete workspace, and it basically has a drop down where you can select all of your workspace presets available, and you'll notice that Sav's workspace isn't actually in here. This took me a while to figure out, but basically it's saying you can't delete the workspace that you're currently in, because After Effects thinks that you want to retain and keep that workspace. So if I get out of here, go back to, for example, standard, and then select this and select delete workspace, go to my drop down menu, and you see my workspace appears there. So just bear that in mind as a quick tip, saves you from pulling out your hair time and time again. So make sure you're out of your preset workspace before you can delete it. Otherwise you cannot delete your workspace if you're inside the actual workspace. Go ahead and select delete and select, and there we go. So we can see it's no longer presented in our workspace environment. Okay, brilliant, and we'll move on. One important and very crucial factor when dealing with After Effects projects is ability to save work appropriately and frequently. So what I mean by that is, we always like or hope to save our work accordingly when we're building up our projects. Now in the past, I've seen students suffered from losing work, and I think everyone suffered some of those problems when dealing with any creative piece of work. And what we can do is we can counteract that by simply setting up After Effects to auto-save work as you go along. And as stated before, After Effects is a very demanding application. It is very RAM hungry. I find the application extremely RAM hungry, so it will kind of slow other applications down. So I do recommend just opening the application's project file and working only with After Effects and not associated with any other applications, or completely close that down unless you've got a really powerful and superior machine. Coming back to the saving issues, what we can do is we can go to edit, and we can go to select preferences, and we can go to autosave, and by default this option is not selected, is unchecked. We can simply check that box, and we can say save every 20 minutes, or specify a value and maximum project versions as well. Then we can go ahead and click OK, or we can click next. That brings us back to multiprocessing as well. I'll work through all of those in a later stage, but for now I just want to stick and show you the autosave. So make sure you have that tab selected. It's quite handy, and I think it will save you guys a lot of nightmares, particularly students, those working towards a deadline, or designers, or any creative individuals working towards deadlines. And what we can also do is go to File. Another really cool feature is increment and save. Increment and save is basically a very powerful way of After Effects including an increment value to your saved file. So what this means is that when you're working with a standard file inside After Effects, which is basically the untitled project AEP file, which is an After Effects project file, when we're working with this type of standard file inside After Effects, if you click just save, if we hit the Control S button, what that basically does is overwrites and saves your file. Now in some cases we actually don't want that. We want to able to save a different version of that file, and what we can do is we can go to File, Increment and Save. Increment and Save saves a copy of your project as another file. So in other words, if we enter a wrong direction, or if we don't like the direction of the creative work we're producing, we can go back into that previous version of the saved file. So it basically enables us to save our project files each step by step through the actual environment. So we can just go to Increment and Save, and this option has kind of helped me a lot throughout my project and working with After Effects, in particularly working with design and creativity inside After Effects. So I strongly recommend you guys using that. Increment and Save is a fantastic way to save multiple versions of your project files. One of the most powerful things about Adobe After Effects, and which is the same reason why I enjoy teaching it so much, is basically the ability to import most files, and that also sustains the capacity to cross-integrate with other applications. So for example, new to this version of Adobe After Effects CS3 is the ability to import Swift files, which is of course the Flash recommended Swift SWF file. And basically After Effects makes a really good job of understanding those files, and we can have a look at what other file types it can import. So what we can do is, if you go to File, Import, we can say Control I or Command I on a Mac, and I'm just going to select a folder, and what I'm going to do is go to File Types, and we can see all of the various different types of file types that basically After Effects can import. So it can import camera raw files, which is a proprietary tag for a DSLR without compression, and we can even do direct show, things like GIF. We can also do things like PNGs, which is fantastic, and we'll have a look at how those work. We can also directly import PSD files, which is Photoshop files, so we don't have to compress them, flatten image, we don't have to compress them into JPEG or whatever. We can just bring them back in. All we need to do is save the Photoshop file and just simply drag and drop it inside After Effects CS3. So it's that basic seamless integration between applications. So we can import Flash files through SWF, Swift files, and we can import Photoshop files using PSD. We can also go, if you scroll down, you can see the Swift file is there as well. We can also import Windows media files as well if we wanted to do that. So we've got WMA and WMV. We can also insert WAV files and a number of different video files, and this works really well. I mean, After Effects makes a really good job of understanding how these files work once it's imported. We can also bring in Maya files if you're really into Maya as well, which is absolutely fantastic. So we can actually bring in some of that footage and work with the Maya file and include a number of effects exclusive to After Effects and let our creativity kind of run wild, if you like. So that's a really good feature inside CS3, and we'll be capitalizing on that, and I'll show you a bit more. We'll be working a lot more with Flash Swift files and Photoshop files as well. So let's now go ahead and import a few files into our project window. So on the left you should see by default your project window. If not, simply navigate to your workspace and select the standard tab, and you should notice then your project panel. What we can do is we can import project files through various ways in After Effects. One of the most easiest ways is to go to File, Import, or you can basically say Control I, Command I on the Mac, or you can right click on your project file in your project in your project doc, sorry, and go to import file. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually import a few files that I want to work with, and so I'm going to select Flash Swift file and select open, and you can see After Effects makes a good job of importing that and sticking it in your project bin. All we then need to do is actually drag that file over there, but I'm not going to do that yet, so I want to import a few more files. So notice that I basically is closed my window. However, if I wanted to open a few more files and continue to do this, a better way to do this would be to import multiple files. So if I right click and go to import multiple files, it now gives me the option. So say for example, if I select that again, I select open, and now it's going to give me another option to import another type of file. So for example, I'm just going to go to a few more video clips. I'll navigate, I'll select, and I'll select open again, and this time it's still giving me the option. So it's basically continuing to give me the option of importing more files until I click done, and I can import a PSD if I want to. So I'll quickly show you if I've got one lying around. I don't think I'm going to have one, but I'll just go ahead and select a JPEG image and select done, and you can see Flash has basically done a good job, After Effects has done a really good job of importing all those various files. Just a few quick tips there. Again, we can use Control I, or you can use Command I on a Mac and import all of the files, or we can use import multiple files. We can also do this. I could have done import file and simply selected all of these files, or press Control A, select all, and select open, and that will by default give me all of those images. However, it's nice to have that ability to go open up the window again. So if I wanted to browse outside that folder, for example, if I wanted to go to file, import file, and I can only select multiple files whilst I'm in this directory. However, if I wanted to go outside this directory, I would need to use the option of file import multiple files. So that's kind of the two distinguishing factors between those two options. In this video, I'm going to continue to focus on the project panel sets, and we're going to look at how to organize our project files more appropriately. Now, because After Effects enables us to import an array of different file formats, we need some control mechanism into organizing our media. So what we can do is we can select this tab here, which is Create New Folder, and I want to click that once, and I'm just going to type in a name, so I'll say Swift, and hit the return key. And now what I'm going to do is add all the Swift files. So I want to select Swift, hold Shift, and click on the other file, and I'm going to basically drag that inside there. If I click on the drop down, you'll see basically these files are associated and contained within inside the Swift folder. And I'm going to do another one for the JPEG, so I'm going to select and just label that pics, and grab those pics and place it in the pics folder. And by default, you'll see that they're basically being organized by an order of preference in their name. So we can see that because the name tag has been selected. What I like to normally do, and the way I normally work with After Effects, is by selecting the type tab here. Basically organizes your media according to the type. So if we've got a sequence, if it's a JPEG or it's a .movie, it'll basically group those elements together and organize them by type. So it's quite a handy trick to have available inside your project window when dealing with a number of different files, to organize your files in various different folders. One word which you'll hear me use frequently inside Adobe After Effects is something called composition, which is also referred to as comp for short term. And we can have a look at this. So basically, composition or a comp is basically can be considered of text, images, Swift, .movie. It can be built up of a series of different graphical elements as well as After Effects, a series of effects, and a series of camera paths, etc. So if we think of this in terms of a Photoshop analogy, so if we have Photoshop document and we've got various text, we've got JPEG images, we've got a number of layers which we want to use. In After Effects terms, that will then be referred to as a comp or a composition. Also, a composition has its own independent timeline. It's basically like a mini movie. It's a lot like Flash movie clips for those who understand or have a basic knowledge of Flash and the way it works. So it's basically like Flash movie clips where it has its own independent timeline. It can be created of various different graphical elements, and then it's kind of all compressed into a comp. So let me give you an example. So we have one composition, we have a title sequence in there, we have text, images, sound, and these are all in layers, so it's a layered composition. What we then do is we develop comp 2, comp 3, comp 4, so we have a number of these compositions. We then compress those compositions and we stitch them together in order to make one complete title sequence. And we would render those out sequentially as well, so that it's less stressful on our machines. We can sometimes have a composition inside a composition inside a composition, a bit like a Russian doll, where you have a smaller doll inside, where you have a big doll inside a smaller doll and a smaller doll, and so forth. So where we can work according to that analogy. It's a lot like Flash movie clips, which we refer to these as nested movie clips, and in After Effects terms we refer to these compositions as nested compositions. So that's an idea of what comps mean, and in the next video we'll create a new comp and we'll begin to develop our own compositions. So After Effects is basically built around compositions and the ability to use multiple compositions to composite video and edit text over video, to composite text over video, and then compress that and to develop one particular sequence. That's the kind of workflow that After Effects is associated with and commonly used for. In order for us to move on, it's quite imperative that we gain an understanding of the various standards associated with TV and particularly video. These terminologies are going to be used quite frequently in Adobe After Effects, so it's really important for us to gain an understanding on how and what these refer to and what these actually mean. So let's have a look. The first one is NTSC. NTSC stands for National Television Standards Committee, and it's basically is an analog television system and is commonly used in USA, Canada, California, Japan, South Korea and the Philippines, and it's basically a standard that's used for these various countries. It's first developed in 1941 and has no provision of 4-color TV. Now basically this is very important because what this means is that if we were developing a DVD which would be played in any of these countries, we would have to use NTSC standard, and that standard has various things associated with it. So it has association of a different color profile, a different frame rate than another standard, which we're going to look at in a lot more detail a lot later on. Moving on, we've got NTSC was the first widely adopted color system in broadcast media, and it's basically has a color encoding which is similar to the system M television signal, which I'm not going to go into a bit more detail. You can have a look at that on Google or in your own time. And it basically consists of 29.97 interlaced frames of video per second, or nearly identical to the system J in Japan. Basically, it runs a frame rate of 29.97 frames per second. So if we consider video as basically still imagery, which what video in its raw form is. So basically if we look at these as all still images, NTSC will run these at 29.97 videos per second, so frames per second, and stitches them all together to make one smooth video. And what this sometimes you'll see these in applications that this figure will be rounded off to 30 frames per second. It makes it easier, but technically it still runs at 29.97 videos per second, and this is what After Effects will give us the option of 29.97 seconds. So this is what we will see in After Effects in the graphical user interface. Moving on, so the frame rate is how fast the video plays back, as stated before. So basically the video can be considered as a collection of images, still images, and this figure refers to how quickly they play back. So for example, for HD video it's going to be around about 50 to 60 frames, so it's actually almost double. Well, it is double. And then we've got HDR, which is a high dynamic range, which is around about 70, which is kind of still in research phase at the moment. So NTSC runs 29.97 frames per second for video. And we've then got PAL, and PAL is basically short for phase alternating line, and is an analog television encoding system used in broadcast television systems in large parts of the world. And basically it's in a kind of a revamp and addition of the earlier version of NTSC. PAL is kind of more used in EU and UK amongst other countries. Okay, so why PAL? 1950s, Western European countries basically were planning to establish color television, and they were faced with a few problems that NTSC had, mainly to do with colors. A problem associated with the NTSC standard at the time is it demonstrated over weakness over kind of long transmission conditions. So what happened at that moment in time was that the colors projected in NTSC were never the same. So if you viewed that picture again and again, it would never be the same as you previously had saw. So this was a kind of a problem. So PAL was developed by Walter Bruch in Germany, unveiled in 1963, which is kind of addition of NTSC. So basically PAL was used mostly in Europe, and it's a standard for UK, and runs at 25 frames per second. And the most kind of distinguishing factor, I don't really want to get into PAL versus NTSC. You can have a really good wiki, you can have a look at wiki, covers that really well. But basically the two most common, differentiating factors between PAL and NTSC is one to do with color. I know PAL handles color a lot better than NTSC. If you look at American televisions, particularly for UK-based, on a UK-based television, you'll see it's quite glossy. So you can have a look at how that handles color. We kind of see that when we watch American TV in the UK. You can see that it's kind of a bit more rich and a kind of more kind of a glossy sheen to it. Also, there's difference between the two standards is a frame rate as well. As stated before, NTSC runs on 29.97 frames per second, while PAL runs 25 frames per second. And we'll have a look at this. So basically, if we wanted to make a DVD for the UK or Europe market, and we wanted to ship that over to UK to be watched on all the DVD players, etc., we would need to use a PAL standard when we're selecting our After Effects projects. If we wanted to do something for the States, it would need to be NTSC. Also, I've got HD runs around at 50 to 60 video frames per second, and we've got 70 video frames per second is still in research phase, and we're looking at HDR, which is high dynamic range, which will ultimately replace HD. So there we have it. Will make a lot more sense when we get back into After Effects, and you can see how these standards are really, really important, and that's what I'm going to demonstrate in my next video. Okay, we're going to go ahead and I'm going to kickstart you guys off in After Effects. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to basically import a stock video, something that I was messing around with inside After Effects. You guys feel free to download some of the videos off YouTube or wherever you want to get them from. At this stage, it doesn't really matter what type of video. I just want to go through the standards of different video standards, something that we looked at in the previous tutorial. So I'm just going to go and drag and drop a video sequence inside After Effects, and straight away you can see that it's a .mov, which is a QuickTime movie. And you can see in the project bin, After Effects tells us how big this file is. So it's basically 720 by 576, and it also states that it runs at a 25 frames per second, millions of colors, and it uses JPEG photo compression, and it also tells us a bit about the sound as well. What we need to do is we need to add a composition. So the idea is, the workflow in After Effects is we would add and import all of our media inside a project bin, and then to create a composition which is a bit like a new container, as explained in my previous tutorials, we need to kind of add a new empty container, create this empty container where we then place all of this media inside, and then we start compositing over that. We compress that container, and then that is a kind of complete composition. We then at the end stitch all those compositions together, and hence our video clip is complete. Okay, so what I'm going to do is go ahead and create this new composition. So what we can do is go to composition, go to new composition. So this is our empty container, or it could be like a movie clip inside Flash, and you see that we've got our presets. Now Adobe has a number of presets in here. So we've got by default you should see NTSC DV, which is American Standard, and we can see the width, and we've got the height. We've also got the lock aspect ratio, which locks our aspect ratio, which is aspect ratio 3:2, and we've then got the pixel aspect ratio. Now when dealing with TV, some of you guys may be thinking pixels in terms of computational terms. Videos not like that. DV, especially DV videos, basically they're going to be a lot taller and less wider. So if we click this tab, we've got a number of different options, and a lot of Adobe's software is basically grouped and chunked together according to different standards. So we've got all the video standards here, we've got the HD video standards here, and then we've got standards for film, and then up here we've got stuff for the web as well, and then we've also got custom. So if we've got NTSC DV, which are the pixels are going to be smaller. So some of the, if you understand pixels in print terms or in web terms, it's not the same. Basically they're small, they're a lot shorter and they're a lot taller. However, if we wanted to create something for widescreen, that will then replicate that, so they'll be a lot wider and a lot less shorter. So it's basically the opposite. That's why there's an option of widescreen. And again, these are going to be American Standard. So if I select NTSC, you can see that we're running a frame rate of 29.97 frames per second. However, if I switch to PAL1 DV, which is a UK standard, you'll see we run now at 25 frames per second. We're also different pixel aspect ratio as well to suit that standard in UK. So if we're developing a DVD for UK base, we would use the PAL preset available inside Adobe After Effects CS3. I'll continue to go through and cycle through quickly some of the other modes as well in my next tutorial. Okay, so in the previous tutorial I'm walking through the presets, and I'm going to continue to cycle through some of these presets, and we'll have a look at some of the differences. So what I'm going to do is select this, and I'll show you here. We've got HD video, we've got 720, and it still runs at 29.97 frames per second. We've also got a 1080 full 1080 HD, and then we've got here we've also got some of the other available options in HD TV, again using 1080 but different frame rate per second depending on what type that you want to select. And then we've got some of the cinema options down here as well. I want to show you a trick. If for example you don't really know what composition settings to choose from, or you're a bit confused, I would go for the one that best suits your original footage or your original video footage, and we can do this through a quick tip. What we can do is we can select this. I want to get out of here for a second. I'm just thinking whether to show you the advanced options. I'll come back to this, and what I'm going to do is click cancel. Another quick tip is basically, say for example you don't really know, or you don't have time to know which preset to choose from. What we can do is select this and just drag this to this icon here, which is a composition window. If I drag that there, and it's basically done that for us. And what the After Effects has done is basically created a composition based on the parameters of my original footage, of my original video. So in other words, if we look at my original video, we can see it runs 25 frames per second. We can also see the dimensions, so 720 by 576, and we've got JPEG compression here. If I select this, this will be the same. So basically it just replicates the parameters of my video footage and sticks that into a composition based on those standards. So that's a really quick tip. So you can go ahead and do that if you wanted to, or if you're stateside, you can go ahead and select on NTSC DV, or if you're UK based, I recommend using PAL1. So if I just show you quickly, we can go to, here we go, that one for UK UK based, and by default CS3 is always stuck on NTSC DV unless you specify otherwise. I'm going to continue to walk you through some of the options available to us in Adobe After Effects CS3. What I've done is I've basically imported a few clips. So I've got this a clip called @effects.mov, which is a QuickTime movie, and another sequence which is another QuickTime movie as well. What I've then done is taken these and selected the composition tab, and that's then replicated the settings for that clip and has provided me a shell, if you like, a composition or a comp. And then what I'm doing is, you'll probably see this at the moment, and what I've done is I've selected type, so it basically sorts my project bin with organizes those files according to this type. So basically I've got the two compositions at the top and I've got my QuickTime movies at the bottom. Okay, so let's have a look at the composition panel, which is this panel here, and by default you guys at home will be seeing the composition window like so, and what I need you to do is just expand that by dragging this out here, and you can drag this one outside as well, so we're viewing it to its full potential. I want to quickly cycle through some of the options available to us inside the composition panel. And the first thing we've got, because I've got two compositions, you may have one in your movie, doesn't really matter, but if you select the drop down, you can have all of your compositions will be nested inside here. So I've got sequence 1, which is that over there, and I've got effects, so basically it switches over to effects, which is basically this kind of stuff that I've got going on here. And go to sequence 1, so basically there's a little clip bin inside here, and it's basically listing all of your sequences, which is quite handy, so we can kind of jump through those different modes. Okay, down here we've got this tab, which is always preview in this view. Well, basically what this does, if we click this tab, this is basically for when we render the camera path, or we're in the 3D mode, or when we're viewing some clip. We'll always, if we click this tab, it will always preview this type of view, whatever we're selected. So that's quite a handy option, and we'll look at that a bit more later when we start setting up camera paths and 3D options and various things to do with that. Not really relevant at this stage, but I needed to explain it anyway. Next thing here is a percentage which we're actually viewing the composition. So if I select to, for example, fit, that will kind of fit the composition there. If I can view 100%, I'm now viewing at 100%. Now, one thing to mention here is that this has no bearing on our final composition or our rendered footage. So this is the only preview mode inside Adobe After Effects. It's a bit like Photoshop when you have the magnification, or it's a bit like Flash. It has no bearing on the content that we're producing inside the environment. And we can go ahead and put that to 50 or whatever you view. I normally use that option, fit up to 100%, and it kind of scales it accordingly. Okay, in the next videos I'll continue to move through these options available inside the composition window. Okay, one thing that I forgot to highlight in my previous video is that a really nice feature is if we select fit up to 100%, and if we basically drag out, basically you can see our machine renders out the video and kind of fits that in and scales that accordingly how I basically drag the footage out. So if I drag it out, it basically scales the video like so. If you see, if I get to 100%, it kind of stops doing that, so that's really nice, and I can go back down. I think if I remember correctly, both of the options do the same, so even if I select fit, you can see it will still do the same, so it won't go larger than 100%, which is quite nice. And again, this has no bearing on our final output, what we see here. It's just like in preview mode. Next option we have is basically enables us to do apply a grid if we want to work with some level of precision. That's quite nice, and I'll come back to this. It's basically to do with masking, toggle mask and shape path visibility. We'll come back to this when we start doing mask, using masking with some of the elements inside After Effects. This here is a time code. If we click here, basically we can edit the time, and it's the same as it runs in hours, minutes and seconds, and the last is a frame. It's the same time codec. Basically, if we go to composition, if we go to new composition, it's the same here as well. the time code. So it's kind of the same going here, but I'll come back to this option again. We can basically, it gives us the current time indicator, so if I drag here we can see the current time, so that's quite handy. And again, the time's displayed in hours, minutes, seconds and frames. Moving on, this is really important, this feature here, which basically this is a resolution of what's being viewed inside our composition window. So what this basically does is it renders out what we're seeing here. So if we select full, it's going to render full resolution of those pixels. If we go to half, it's basically, you'll see that it's kind of pixelated, and that's because it's only rendering half of the pixels at the moment. So it kind of gives us the option to view. Now again, this has no bearing on our final rendered output, but it's basically another way inside Adobe After Effects CS3, another way for us to kind of speed up our rendering and our process. So say for example, if we're working with a load of clips and we want to render or preview them, but we know that they're really good quality, we can drop and render that half of those pixels, and then we can do that a third of those pixels as well, and then you can see the quality deteriorating, and we can do a quarterly as well, so that's quite bad. And again, if we jump to full, this is what will the kind of footage will look like anyway. So it's not really, it doesn't have no bearing, it's just a way for us to speed up our workflow. Okay, so let's move on. The next area is, the next tab shall I say, is basically this region of interest. And what this does is, if we select the tab, you'll notice that I can basically select an area or point of interest on your screens. What will happen is, by default, it's usually kind of set like this. So let me just set it back. And if I click on this, that's what you see. You don't see nothing. However, what you would need to do is basically just drag your crosshair and point to a region of interest, like so. And this focus is After Effects focus its efforts towards this area of interest. By default, the background in After Effects is black, so don't worry about that. So this is another mechanism inside After Effects that basically speeds up our process of rendering. So for example, I could render that out full, or I could put it to half, or leave it at full, and I can kind of just render that out, and that will only render that area out of region of interest. So it's another protocol of speeding up our rendering inside After Effects. As stated before, After Effects will impose and slow down your machine a lot. It's very processor hungry, and it's very RAM hungry as well. Unless you've got a fast machine, and depending on what exactly you want to do with After Effects, it will slow down your machine. So these are kind of inbuilt mechanisms that help us render out footage or sequences or clips of areas of interest that we want to in high resolution, so we can go ahead and do that. Also, another quick feature, if I remember correctly, what we can do is we can crop our composition according to this area as well. So if I go to composition and go to crop composition to region of interest, and what that basically does is crops our whole composition towards that area of interest, so I will get that oblong feature. If I click that tab off, it basically shows me the rest of my footage. Moving on, if I select this, which is the next tab, and it's basically to do with transparency, and this the transparency grid, just like Photoshop. If I click that off, if I move this and now click this, you'll see that it's basically looks like Photoshop background, and we're working with transparencies. Again, I'll come back to this, I'll show you how this works. We then have active camera. Basically this is to do with your active cameras once we're in 3D mode. I'll come back to this. We can just pan from our different cameras, front, left, top, right, bottom and so forth. The same again with the views, really to do with camera paths. If I continue, this basically is to do with larger monitors to switch between aspect and pixel ratio, toggle between pixel ratio, and fast previews. Again, I'll come back to this. We can basically view a wireframe, but it's not going to work because I'm not in 3D mode. I'll come back to this tab, and we've then got the timeline, which basically switches over to our timeline, something that I'll come back to again. And we finally got our wireframe. Now the wireframe is really important because it can give us a basic wireframe model of our creative process. So if I click this tab here, you can see that my sequence 1 is, my composition is built up of the sequence 1 movie and my audio file, if I had an audio file associated with that as well. So basically we can show this wireframe to a client or to a project manager or whatever, and it basically will show us what this composition is made up of. Now this is a very basic and a very simple composition within its infancy. However, if it was a detailed composition, it would kind of detail all of those areas. So it would have text, it would have sound, it would have squares, flash files, Photoshop files, and it will basically say all sequence 1, which is my composition name, is built up of all these different elements. So it's quite cool, very handy to have. We can close that and we can go back to our sequence there. We've then got the exposure lock, or reset exposure is basically in preview mode. It enables us to go through the F points just like you would in photography to set our exposure time. So what we can do is we can click this and we can go back and drag those numerical values up or down, and basically we're increasing or decreasing the exposure. So we're allowing more light in, and we're not allowing more light in, so we're closing the exposure and we're opening the exposure wider, and that's only in preview mode. I'll show you again these last few features will make more sense when we're actually using them natively inside After Effects, but that's kind of all I want to cover within the composition panel to kickstart us inside After Effects CS3. In this video I'm going to demonstrate how layers work inside Adobe After Effects CS3. Now layers work in a similar way that they would work in other Adobe applications such as Photoshop. So let's have a look at this in a little bit more detail. What I've done is I've imported a sequence and a few images, so you can see that in my project panel like so. I've then dragged on a sequence which is basically a really quick sequence that I've just developed, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag some of these images into the project panel, and into the timeline from the project panel. So I'm just going to click, drag, and then do the same, and again do the same, and one more like so. Now the way that layers work inside After Effects is that they start from the top, work your way to the bottom. So they start from top to bottom. So whatever we place in the top layer is the foremost and upmost layer that we'll see in our composition window. So if I switch this off, will now be the second layer, and you can see the other layers behind there. So if I click and drag this over here, you can see if I click that, that will be the next layer. So you can see how they are positioned against each other, and I'll move this and I'll drag that down. So these are basically very small JPEG images. They're very small in resolution, and you can see how layers work sequentially. So this will be the second one, this will be the third one, fourth one, and the fifth one. And the one at the top, which I've turned the visibility off by switching the eye icon, is the one that appears and covers all of them. So if I drag sequence 1 to the bottom layer, to the second layer, you'll now see the first image appears at the top. To turn the visibility on and off, you just need to toggle between the eye icons like so, just like in Photoshop. And another quick tip is I'm just going to place this composition to the top by dragging the first one down, and what I'm going to do is if I select, say for example, click on this image, and what I'm going to do is, you can see it's quite small, I'm going to basically stretch this out to the composition window. A quick tip, what we can do is we can go to layer, and we can go to transform, and we can go to fit to comp, and that will basically stretch that image out and fit it to the composition window. This is a very small JPEG image, so if we were going to use this, I would recommend on obtaining a high-res image to begin with, and this works particularly well with Photoshop and combined After Effects, and we'll move on to that in a later stage in the tutorial. Continuing with layers, what you'll see is that each of its layers has its own properties, which I'm going to show you now. So if I select the first layer, and you can see this layer like so in my first in my composition window, and what I'm going to do is I'll actually switch the eye icon off that layer, and I'm just going to click this object here, the solo object, and if I click that, you can see that basically what this does is it hides everything else and it only makes that visible. That's quite a cool and nifty trick if we want to actually just view that content on its own. So we can do that, and it basically hides everything else inside your composition, so that's quite cool. Another cool feature is the lock tab. So sometimes, especially when we're in the 3D mode inside After Effects, you'll see the layers become quite confusing and can become a bit tricky, especially when objects are concealed over a number of other objects inside the layers. So what we can do is we can basically click the lock icon, and this basically locks that icon for us to in order for us not to manipulate it. So let's have a look at this. I'm going to basically switch the icon of the first layer, and I'm going to select that layer, it's layer 2, and I'm going to basically click the lock, and you can see I can't actually select this layer, it's actually selecting the layer underneath. So that's one of the cool ways of and an advantage of using layers by locking the tab. And another quick trick is what we can do is we've got labels up here. If we select the tag, and what we can do, if we select the layer underneath, which is basically the swatch here for the tag, we can basically color coordinate our own tags. So we may want to do this. We may want to have red for all 3D objects or all null objects or camera paths. So we can actually do that and set up different color coordination around basic layers by selecting this tab here. Now each layer inside After Effects has its own properties. So if we select one of them, you can see we've got the ability to transform. We've got the transform function, and then if we select the transform option open, you can see we have a number of different options, and these we can all animate. That's the whole idea. So we've got a lot of control over all these parameters. We've got anchor point, position, scale, rotation, and opacity, and I'll show you in the next up and coming videos on how to manipulate using these simple parameters for that layer. And what we've also got is the audio tab as well, and I'll come back to the audio tab. This sequence has no audio inside here, but I'll come back to audio, and we'll probably make another set just devoted to audio inside After Effects as well. So if we continue going on here, we've basically can view and toggle between different modes. That will be a draft setting, and that will be a nicer, smoother setting highlighted by the pixels. So it's basically to do with the quality, the draft, or the best. We can set this at a number of other options inside After Effects. However, this is only to preview. Again, it has no bearing on your rendering of your video. We've also got a few other features here which I'll come back to, stuff to do with motion blur, and there's a really cool one for 3D. So basically, if you switch that, enables you to edit your layers inside 3D mode. Again, we'll come back to some of these properties. You'll see me using them, and you have more of an understanding when you see me actually using them and going through each of those properties to do with layers. Another crucial component with layers is the various different types of layers available to us inside After Effects. And this is what I'm going to show you in this video. So the first thing is I've got an image layer at the top inside my timeline, and what I'm going to do is you'll see if I drag and scrub through this, you'll see that only the image appears. What we can do is we can drag this bar here like so, and basically that means that the image will only be presented for that duration of that time period inside our composition. So if I play this, you'll now see that my other composition appears in my second layer. So we'll move more onto this inside a few other training videos. So basically I just want to give you an idea of, we can drag that here, for example, we can stretch that out. So basically what that means is it's only going to be presented for that period of time, and that's one of the ways how we can edit video really quickly. Another cool feature is that if we switch the tag and the color swatch of this to, say, for example, red, and that now changes the bar, so we could basically highlight all of the JPEG images inside a composition red, for example, or color code them in that way, just so we have a visual preference of that's what we're working with, and that is a JPEG image, and because it's red. That's one cool feature, so we can kind of drag that around. And again, I'll come back to this, and we'll work with rough cuts and editing in some level of precision as well. Another cool feature inside After Effects is different types of layers that we can have. The way I'm going to show you this, so what we can do is we can right click and go to new, And this brings us up all the different types of layers. We've got text. Text has its own set of properties. So if we select text, it enables us to create various things to do with text, fonts. We can animate text. Now After Effects is really powerful when dealing with text, so we can use this to create professional titling for a video sequence or a trailer or something like that. We also have solid. A solid is basically gives you a solid block of color, and they're primarily used to develop effects. If we select solid, we can basically gives us a block of solid color which we can then overlay over text or overlay over video and generate some level of kind of transparencies or colors to do with effects based on solid. Very simple. We've then got light, camera, and null object. These three live in 3D environments. So when we switch to the 3D mode, these modes come alive when available to us inside 3D mode. So they basically come alive inside 3D mode. We've got light, camera, and null object. Null object is very powerful. It's quite complex. I'll come back to this later. Camera enables us to develop a camera path, which is quite cool. And we've then got, sorry, just go back to that menu. We've then got lighting, which is quite important again in 3D space. We've got shape layer. Shape layer is really powerful. Shape layer is basically a miniature version and kind of the similar things you can have inside Adobe Illustrator, and it gives us an opportunity to develop and create our own shapes, so vector graphics and all that kind of stuff, and we can mess around with those as well, which will come back. We've got adjustment layer, which basically enables us to adjust certain properties of a layer, and then we've got Adobe Photoshop file. Again, I'll come back to those two. They're not that really important as some of these. We'll kind of start and work our way down throughout those different types of layers. Those are the basic types of different types of layers that you can have inside After Effects, and we'll be looking at these in a lot more detail. In this video, I'm going to show you a way on how to pre-compose a layer. By that, what I mean is basically we're going to take a series of layers, various different layers, and we're going to compress them in order to give us one fresh new layer. In technical terms, it's referred to as pre-composing inside After Effects, or pre-compose a layer inside After Effects. And I'll be using this methodology again and again and again, so ensure that you're familiar with this. In order for me to demonstrate this, what we need to do is bounce out of After Effects for a second. So we're going to go over to Photoshop. And if you're not familiar with Photoshop, don't worry at this stage. What I want you to do is press Ctrl N or Command and N on the Mac, and to specify 500 by 400 pixels and a background contents of white. Select OK. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a brush, we're going to develop some graphical elements and bring them inside After Effects. And what I want you to do is insert a just take the gradient, and I'm just going to grab and create a gradient like so. And what we now need to do is insert a new layer, and we're just going to take a brush, and I'm going to use my cloud brush that I used in my previous tutorials. And if you haven't got time to go back and look at my previous tutorials inside Photoshop, I've basically developed a cloud brush, and it's on the website. Is called Looking at Photoshop in More Detail, I think. And you can have a look at the cloud brush that I've developed. If you haven't got time, just use a standard brush inside Photoshop. You can use the leaf or the star. I'm going to use my my cloud brush, so I'm going to go ahead and just create some clouds like so. Just going to do this really quickly to show you guys. Okay, I think I'm happy with that. I'm just going to add a bit more detail in some areas, like so, and we'll just add some more shape to this, puffiness to this bit here, like so. Okay, I'm happy with that. The next thing we need to do is ensure that this was ensuring that this content was on a separate layer, just take your eraser tool, and what we need to do is, using a soft brush, so taking your eraser tool, we can have a look at and ensure the hardness is 0 and your diameter is around about to 80 to about 100. And what we're going to do is we need to erase some of the content around our cloud or the brush itself. So basically all of our content for our brush is centralized, so I need all of the content centralized inside your layer, like so. And I think that should be okay. And if you switch this eye icon, you can see that all of your content is in the center. The next thing we need to do is select your background, bin your background, and select yes, and just save this document in a directory. And we're going to open up this file. You just need to save it as a PSD, so I'll quickly show you. Go to File, Save As, and I'm just going to give this a name, so I'll just say Save As Clouds. Clouds PSD, and that's it. And we can save it with layers as well, so just go ahead and click the Save tab. In the next video I want to show you how to take this Photoshop file and import it inside After Effects, and we're going to pre-compose these layers. In the previous tutorial we've just created a graphical element inside Adobe Photoshop. In this tutorial what we're going to do is we're going to import that PSD file, and we're going to duplicate that in a series of different layers, and we're going to then pre-compose all of those layers together. So let's take a look. What we're going to do is just simply drag and drop that PSD file inside After Effects. You'll see this dialog box open like so, and what we need to do is the import kind. We've got various options. For this one we can just select footage and merged layers and select OK, and you'll see my clouds PSD has appeared inside the project panel. If I then drag that and drop that to the window, you can see my cloud has appeared. Now because the clouds have the way that they're created with inside the brush inside Photoshop, they basically have some level of transparency. So if I select and drag that and put that all the way on top of the stack, you can see that it's got transparency. In particularly, we also deleted and removed the previous layer that it was sitting on. That was one of the reasons why we did that, because we wanted to retain that transparency inside Photoshop. So another thing, speaking of transparency, another thing we can do once we've got something like this inside After Effects, we've got total control over graphical elements. So what we could do is we could go to Layer, we could go to Transform, and we can go to Opacity, and we can specify, for example, 50, and select OK, and you can see now with 50% transparent. We can also do that if you wanted to do that at home. I'm just going to press Ctrl and Z. Okay, another thing is we can animate this as well. So we could go, if we click this tab here, we can go to Transform. I don't want to show you this now because I show you this in another video. And what we can do is, I've got this here, and if I play this, there we have the footage at the bottom still works, and we can basically crop this to appear at a series at different times, so we can have that and the cloud appears or whatever. Okay, so what we need to do for this is I'm going to simply select the clouds PSD, and I'm going to press Control and D or Command D on the Mac, and Control D, Command D, basically what they do is duplicate the layer, and we can see that it's duplicated the layer like so. And I'll do another one, and I'll drag that here like so. So I'm just kind of building up a cloud sequence, and I can stick that like over around here, and I'll do another one like so. And the idea of this is that if I select all of these layers and I'm holding Shift and I clicked on the last one, and it basically selects all of the layers, and I can now move these layers around. Say for example if I wanted to flatten that image like we do in Photoshop, what we can do is something called pre-compose inside After Effects, and we'll do this numerous times. So what we need to do is select composition and layer, not composition, layer, and go to pre-compose, which is last option, and After Effects automatically assumes that we will move all of those layers into the new composition, and that's fine, and we can go ahead and select OK, and you can see it's now referred to as pre-comp 1, and we can select that and we can move this around as one kind of composition, and we can use that freely, and you can see that's stored there. Another quick trick is if we press Alt and click on this, I've double clicked, you can see I'm now into the original edited version, so we can actually go back into that edited version, and these are a series of nested layers, if you like. So it's a bit like a movie clip inside Flash. We can go back and view our nested layers, and you can see I can move around a cloud if I wanted to, and I can pre-compose that. For example, if you see some of my other ones, they were kind of if you saw the composition, it was had on the side of that, it kind of had its square boundary, so we can kind of remove that and have some more opacity. So if I wanted to use a cloud, for example, like so, and again I can select all of those, same protocol, go to layer and go to pre-compose and select OK, and that is now pre-composed 2. If we close that, if we go back, we've got pre-compose 1, and if we remove pre-compose 1 by deleting, we can now select pre-compose 2, and we can just switch that on the top of the stack, and there we go. So we've merged all layers. So that's what we call pre-composing inside After Effects CS3. In this video we're going to have a look at markers. There are two types of markers available to us inside After Effects. The first type of marker is a composition marker. Second type is layer markers. Now, composition markers are composition specific, layer markers are layer specific, and basically markers are elements inside the timeline which help us to identify and point to a moment in time of that action taking place. So let's have a look at this. First thing is I've got imported a sequence. You can work with any type of sequence, a QuickTime movie, and it's also worth mentioning that currently I'm running the standard default NTSC DV format inside my After Effects file, which is why I've got a frame rate of 29.97 FPS. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select this and drag that to the create new composition window, and that automatically replicates the frame rate of which this composition was recorded, and that was at 25 frames per second. And you can see that composition like so. And on the side here from our marker bin, what we can do is select that and just drag out one here, and I'm going to drag out another marker here, and these are composition markers, and I'm going to create a third one here as well, or a second one should I say, and I'm just going to place that like so. The second one I'm going to show, we'll just drag that and place that area in that moment in time, and we've got multimedia coming in here, and I'm just going to click and drag that here. So you can see I've identified three crucial elements, moments in time, shall I say. We've got University of Westminster, we've then got School of Electronics, we've then got multimedia. Okay, now the nice thing about this is that if I click 0 on my keyboard, it will jump to that moment in time. If I click 1 on my keyboard, it will then jump, and then 2, and then so forth. So that's one of the ways in which we would use markers to basically jump in that moment in time. Another cool feature of these markers is if I double click this, opens up the marker window. It also gives us the time and duration of which this marker is being presented in. We can also link to Flash content as well, which I'll do in a later stage. But a comment we can place is I can just say, for example, multimedia, and select OK, and that didn't really work. I'll just drag that there, and you can select OK, and you can see that basically it appears there like so. In order to delete our markers, what we can do is we can just right click and go to delete this marker or delete all markers. I'm going to delete all markers. The next one I'm going to show you is a layer marker, and those were basically composition markers. So let's have a look at layer markers. I'm going to get rid of this composition, and I'm just going to basically drag an image there to the sequence like so. And what I'm going to do is go to layer and go to add marker, and you can see that it's basically added a marker here. And what I can do, I can add a few more. I'm going to go to layer and go to add marker again, and I'll do another one as well. You can also use the asterisk key on your numerical keyboard as well, a shortcut key to add layer markers. And the nice thing about layer markers is that if I double click this, opens up the same window but for a layer marker, you can see, and I can just say books and select OK. So basically that gives you identification, a little name that appears inside the layer marker of what is actually happening in that layer marker. So say for example, if this was a footage and the books sequence came in or something happened, this will visually enable me to identify that the books are appearing at this moment in time, which are quite cool. Again, to delete this, we can delete and delete this marker. The key visual distinguishing factor between a composition marker and a layer marker is that layer markers appear here while composition markers appear here like so. So these are the two distinguishing factors. So up here will be my composition markers, and we've got here my layer markers, which appear across this bar, which is signifying that it's a layer. In this video, I'm going to show you a method in how to preview your content using the timeline controls provided here, like so. So basically, if you want to extend this slightly, and I'll be working and showing you the proper way on how to view content. Now, one of the first and most easiest ways to preview content, especially in particularly with your with some of your video footage or animation, is by clicking the spacebar tab. So go ahead and select that, and you'll notice that if I stop this for a second, you'll notice by pressing spacebar on the keyboard, you have FPS, frames per second, which basically is saying not in real time. So basically you realize that this is playing back and it's not in real time. Now, as stated before, video can be in its purest form is basically images switched together, played back in rapid succession. So basically, by selecting the spacebar, After Effects kind of goes through and does its best to stitch those series of sequences together, and you'll notice that you'll see this green bar here. Now, if I click this and make any changes to this video footage, we lose that green line. So say for example, if I just click and I'm just going to press the up key on the keyboard like so, just by that small change, but I've nudged it by a few pixels, and you can see that I've lost that green bar. That means I need to re-render and in order to preview this again. So if any small changes does affect that. So another quick way, if I scrub through this, you can see that that green bar kind of filling out as well. And I think it's the same as Adobe Premiere if they haven't changed it in this version. Okay, another way to preview this properly is by RAM preview. And the RAM preview basically previews this and places that in random access memory. So we can do this by two ways. If we select the numerical value on the keyboard shortcut, that's not the 0 on the actual keyboard, but the little numbers associated in numerical value on the side. So the laptop users, I don't believe, have that. If you're fortunate enough, you're lucky. If you haven't, there's another way of doing this by selecting this tab here. And if I click first frame, if I select this tab here, this basically previews and renders this in real time. And you can see that this is being previewed in random access memory, and you can see the numbers counting up towards 340, which is requested. And like so, and I'm going to stop this here. I'm going to click rewind, and I'm going to play this, and that's now rendered out enough for us to preview this as well. And there's a few rendered options as well. If I click stop and rewind, so basically that's brilliant. That's what we really need, and you'll always see me select that tab. However, you'll see that footage basically gets recorded and being placed in your random access memory, so it will slow down your machine a lot. If your machine is becoming slowed down, there's a way to basically remove all of the cached RAM previews. And the way we can do that is if we go to composition and go to edit and go to purge, and just go to undo, go to select image caches, and if I select that, you'll see I now have to record that and re-preview that, sorry, inside After Effects. So I need to switch the RAM preview again. So that's basically wiped out all the previewed versions as well. Now another tip on previewing in RAM: it will slow down your machine. If your machine does get slowed down, try to increase or devote more power in After Effects, and I'll show you that on a Mac as well on another tutorial, or upgrade the RAM is one of the best ways. Also, it's not worth touching the CPU, just upgrade all the RAM. Also, you can upgrade the video cards and the graphic cards. That boosts up the power inside After Effects as well. Another quick thing is to do with resolution. Now I've got it on auto. Auto is kind of really cool. We can also do half the size, so it'll only preview the half the size of that render. So there we go, you can see I've lost resolution as well. And if I click rewind, and I can also go to a third, so basically it will preview, RAM preview, only a third of those pixels become rendered, and a quarter will only be a quarterly of those pixels being rendered as well. I normally have it on auto. Auto is a really cool one. Full screen will again slow down your machine and will slow down your preview inside your environment. Now again, previewing your RAM previewing options has no bearing on your final rendering. We're not finally rendering. We're only previewing in RAM preview mode. So these are the kind of options that you'll need to be dealing with when playing back to review your content inside After Effects.